Imagine this. You are an investigator. You spent months on the case, found enormous compelling evidence, gathered it all in a single comprehensive folder, and you present it to an inquirer. Here it is, you say. All the conclusions that you need, with all the sources that you could want. This is definite proof. But the person just quickly glances over it and says, yeah, alright, this folder seems to have everything in it, but do you have anything outside of this folder that could also prove your case? If you'd done your job well, there wouldn't be anything significant outside of it, right? The folder was created to hold all the necessary material. The situation is comical, and yet this is how the historicity of the Bible is often treated. People dismiss the Gospels as circular reasoning. They're presented with the evidence folder, a collection of documents carefully preserved, and then ask for the proof outside the very collection that was made specifically to be this proof. And let's be clear about this folder. The Bible isn't a single book from one author. It's a library, a collection of books carefully brought together over the centuries. The compilation was made specifically from the sources that were considered the most trustworthy. That's why so many other books were rejected. And the books that were rejected, they were the ones that added wild, suspicious new claims, often with very shady origins. If anything, this shows the early church trying its best to preserve the original truth, not invent a new one. But let's take the bait. Let's humor this request. Let's close the folder for a minute and only look for the evidence on the outside. Historically speaking, to prove any person or event, we need sources, preferably from different independent authors. And if we're talking about a controversial figure, you get bonus points for sources from both supporters and opponents. For the existence of Jesus, we have this. From the first century alone, we have at least 12 independent sources. But let's ignore the 5 authors who were supporters. Let's only look at the sources who were not on his side. These are more important because when your enemies confirm your story, that is the gold standard for historical evidence. We know exactly who they were. First, Flavius Josephus, a first century Jewish historian. He mentioned Jesus in 2 passages, including a brief mention of his brother. James, the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ, he says. Second, Tacitus, a Roman senator and historian. He is widely regarded by modern scholars as one of the greatest Roman historians. Writing about Emperor Nero, Tacitus mentions a figure named Christus, who suffered the extreme penalty in Judea under Pontius Pilate. Tacitus viewed Christianity negatively, calling it mischievous superstition. He confirms the man, the time, the place, and the execution. And he hated the movement. We can even add a third, just a bit later, from the 2nd century, the Greek philosopher Celsus. He was a fierce opponent of early Christianity. And funnily enough, in his arguments against Christianity, he implicitly confirmed that Jesus did miracles. He tried to explain it away by saying that Jesus learned magic when he stayed in Egypt. So just from those hostile sources alone, we can confirm the core facts. Jesus existed. He was baptized by John the Baptist. He had a ministry. He was crucified under Pontius Pilate. And his followers claimed he rose from the dead. Now we have to deal with this last claim. There is a consensus among modern historians. They have an obligation not to posit a supernatural cause for a historical event. In other words, their job description doesn't let them certify a miracle. Fine, but what can they do? Well, they can use a functionalist approach. They can look at the people who made the claim and ask, what was the function of this belief? What did they stand to gain? This is where the case gets really interesting. The thing here is that not a single disciple, not one, stood to gain anything from inventing the resurrection. Immediately after the death of Jesus, Christianity was put on the other side of the law, and for the next 300 years, Christians faced enormous, brutal persecution across the Roman Empire. And this was a very violent empire that unleashed unimaginable cruelty on anyone it thought was making trouble for the public order. And Christians were seen as the worst kind of troublemakers. They were treated like high-road bandits, criminals of the worst kind. There was literally no more dangerous occupation than to be a Christian in the early years of the faith. What about financial gains? There were none. A petty thief had less risk and more potential profit than an early Christian. Their communities had to be underground. This meant no building of hierarchies, no social status, no authority, no money, and no security. Despite all that, they remained faithful. Even more, they went out and preached, risking their lives for no obvious worldly gain. It's as if they really believed it. They were sincere, and considering that original disciples, at least 11 out of 12, all died cruel martyrs' death, it confirms that they were uniformly convinced. If they gained nothing, risked everything, and died rather than recant, you have two options. They were history's dumbest conspirators, or they actually sincerely believed it. And if they believed it, they must have seen something. So, what could have happened? Theory 1, someone posed as Jesus, an impostor. For the closest circle of people who lived and traveled with him for 3 years? Seriously? Do you think they'd be that easy to fool? Even identical twins can be told apart by people who truly know them, and they did know Jesus. This one is a non-starter. Theory 2, hallucinations. This is the most common one. A grief-stricken disciple has a hallucination. Okay, possible. For one person, but all of them, at different times, in different groups. The text reports multiple separate appearances. One of them was to a group of 500 people at once. There is no documented medical case for a mass collective hallucination, especially of this scale. It's unprecedented. Some people would try to flip this and say, well, it must have been a mass hallucination because the only other option is a resurrection. But think about it. You're explaining away one unprecedented event, the resurrection, by inventing multiple unprecedented events, a whole series of mass hallucinations. And even if you take that, regardless, all of them coincidentally happened at the same time, in the same place, about the same person. Extraordinary. What could make it all so special? Perhaps the resurrection? Now, there is one last argument I often hear. History is written by the winners. This claim is that the whole story was just fabricated years later by the winners, the Roman Church. But this isn't really true to how history works. History isn't written by the winners, it's written by the literate. Egyptian scribes hid information from their Greek masters. English monks documented the Vikings' raids while the Vikings were burning their monasteries. And these so-called winners, the Roman Church, couldn't even eradicate heresies effectively. We still have the Gnostic Gospels they supposedly tried to suppress. The idea that they flawlessly fabricated the core story just doesn't hold up. And now, choose your miracle. I'm not claiming this as an airtight mathematical proof. This is an outline of a historical case. Is it convincing enough? Well, it is for me. Many people will still object, but historically speaking, you are left with a massive problem. You have to explain why cowards who fled in fear suddenly became martyrs who preached with courage, why they gained nothing but persecution and death, why they all told the same story and never recanted, and why even their enemies confirmed the key facts of the story. Essentially, you're trading one miracle for another. You can have either the most inexplicable, unprofitable, and perfectly kept conspiracy in all of human history where everyone involved lost everything for a lie and not a single of them ever broke, or you can have the resurrection. You choose.